I sat at the head of my own table, the pot roast growing cold on my plate as my son's laughter cut through the room like a knife. "She's penniless, powerless, and alone," he declared, while his wife smirked over her wine. Penniless, powerless, alone. After decades of careful saving, after burying my husband with dignity, after building a life brick by brick, my worth was reduced to nothing. They thought they'd already won, but they hadn't seen the banker's statements yet. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. The dining room was too quiet for how loud the laughter felt. Mark leaned back in Eleanor's old oak chair like it belonged to him already, his wine glass half drained, swirling cheap Cabernet like it was liquid gold. "You know, Mom," he drawled, "Sophie says we should get you one of those reverse mortgages. At least your house could start earning something before it falls apart." Sophie chuckled, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "It's not like you're flush with options, Eleanor. No offense, but Social Security barely buys coffee these days. How are you even managing this place?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. Eleanor Price sat at the head of the table, straight-backed, hands folded neatly in her lap. She'd prepared the pot roast herself. Her recipe, same as always. But now, with Mark carving the last slice like a conqueror, it felt like she was the guest in her own home. Grace, seated quietly across from Eleanor, shifted uncomfortably. The tension prickled her skin like splinters. Her fork clinked against her plate. "Maybe we should just enjoy dinner," she offered, voice soft. "Oh, Grace," Sophie sighed, with the long, suffering tone of someone who imagined herself misunderstood. "We're just being realistic. Someone has to talk about the future. Your grandma's not getting any younger and, let's be honest, this house isn't either." Mark laughed too loudly. "She's penniless, powerless, and alone." The words hung in the air like a slap. Grace looked to Eleanor, eyes wide with apology she couldn't speak. But Eleanor only smiled, faintly, almost like she hadn't heard a word. She rose carefully, folding her napkin and placing it beside her empty plate. "Excuse me," she said, voice light as air. "The coffee's on." She left the dining room without looking back. The hallway creaked under Eleanor's steps, the floorboards familiar beneath her worn slippers. She didn't go to the kitchen. Instead, she climbed the stairs, one careful step at a time. The murmurs of her son and daughter-in-law drifting up behind her like ghosts who didn't know they'd already lost. Inside her bedroom, the walls exhaled silence. She knelt beside the low dresser and reached behind the stack of old quilting magazines. Her fingers found the key taped beneath the drawer, still there, still untouched. She unlocked the bottom compartment. Out came a small metal lockbox, scratched from age but sturdy. She laid it gently on the bedspread, unlatched the hinges, and opened the lid. Inside were the sealed envelopes, 7 of them, each labeled by year, each containing updated financial statements, certificates of deposit, portfolio summaries, notarized documents, Alan Brooks's signature on every page. Eleanor traced one envelope's edge with her finger, the weight of it comforting. Her late husband would have been proud. She'd done everything exactly how they planned. No shortcuts, no mistakes. Downstairs, Sophie's laugh burst again, high-pitched and hollow. Eleanor's lips barely moved as she whispered to herself, "They think I'm broke. They've never done the math." She placed the envelope back into the box, then closed the lid with a firm click. Her reflection in the mirror across the room stared back. Aged, yes. Soft around the edges, but not brittle, not broken. She locked the box, slid it back behind the magazines, and pressed the drawer closed with quiet finality. The house had grown silent again. Grace must have left early. Mark and Sophie too, probably. They never stayed long unless there was something to ask for. Eleanor moved to the window and pulled aside the lace curtain. The street outside glowed amber under the lamplight. Autumn leaves swirled past the curb like they were being pushed somewhere important. Her hand tightened slightly on the curtain. They wanted to believe she was powerless. That was their comfort. That was their mistake. She turned from the window, her face unreadable, her steps even, and walked slowly toward the closet. Tomorrow, she would begin the next phase. But tonight, she let the silence stretch, heavy and intentional, like the last calm breath before a long-awaited storm. The morning after the dinner felt colder than it should have. Early October air crept through the drafty corners of the house, but Eleanor didn't bother with the thermostat. She liked the cold. It made things sharper. She sat at her bedroom desk, a chipped mug of black coffee untouched beside her. The lockbox sat open, the smell of old paper mixing with the faint scent of cedar from the closet. She lifted the envelope marked 2024 and slit the seal with a letter opener shaped like a feather. Her husband's, from when he taught literature. Inside, precision. A portfolio summary, several printed account statements, a few CD renewal slips, all in her name alone. Not a joint account in sight. Alan Brooks's signature inked at the bottom of each document, neat and formal. She scanned the balances, high six figures in savings, 2 certificates of deposit maturing next spring. A modest investment portfolio that had quietly grown over 15 years. No frills, no gambling, just steady, silent accumulation. A knock came at the bedroom door, gentle, hesitant. Eleanor didn't startle. "It's open." Grace peeked in, hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands. Her hair was still messy from sleep, and there was a crease down her cheek from the couch pillow. "I didn't leave last night," she said. "I stayed after they left. I didn't want you to be alone." Eleanor turned slightly, a thin smile warming her expression. "Thank you." Grace stepped into the room, her eyes falling on the documents. "What's all that?" Across the street, the neighbors who once looked away now looked differently. Mrs. Hartley waved while watering her porch mums. The Talbots nodded from their car, the engine still running. And Eleanor, serene as ever, offered them all the same thing. Nothing loud, nothing boastful, just a faint, untroubled smile. Not everyone needed to know the details, but they all knew what mattered. She'd won. That evening, Rachel stopped by with a small envelope. Nothing formal, no embossed headers, just a note. Final vault key enclosed. No one but you and Grace. No further legal exposure. Congratulations. Eleanor placed the key in the drawer beneath the good silver, behind the felt-lined tray no one else touched. It didn't glitter. It didn't need to. The house was quiet that night. No calls, no knocks, no questions. Just the sound of the kettle on the stove and the soft ticking of the mantel clock. Grace set 2 mugs of tea on the table and slid into the chair across from her grandmother. "You think they'll ever come back?" she asked softly. Eleanor stared out the window at the darkening lawn. "No." A pause. "Because they can't," she added. "And because they know I'd never open the door again." Grace studied her. "And if they did?" Eleanor met her granddaughter's eyes. "Then I'll pour myself another cup," she said, "and let them see what peace looks like without them." Outside, the wind stirred the leaves. Inside, Eleanor leaned back in her chair, hands around a warm mug, gaze soft, heart untroubled. No headlines, no shouting, no need to prove anything anymore. Just the stillness that comes after a storm, and the quiet victory of a battle won without ever raising a voice. She glanced toward Grace, then toward the window, and whispered to no one at all. "Peace is the richest dividend." The house was warm with the scent of garlic and thyme. Outside, dusk laid its soft fingers across the neighborhood, pulling shadows longer and wrapping the house in gentle quiet. But inside, the dining room was lit golden, steady, and alive. The table was small now. No need for extensions. Just two place settings, polished silverware, and a bottle of red wine breathing near the edge. Eleanor stood at the stove, flipping the last strip of steak in the skillet. She moved without rush, without effort. There was no performance in it, just rhythm. The way she had cooked for 40 years without ever needing a thank you to make it feel worthwhile. Grace set the table, laying napkins folded in triangles and lighting the candle in the center. It wasn't a holiday. It didn't need to be. Peace deserved celebration too. "I still can't believe you did steak," Grace said with a smile. Eleanor turned, eyebrow arched. "You think I don't know how to feed a victory?" They both laughed. By the time they sat, the wine had opened up, and so had the air between them. The kind of laughter that came now wasn't sharp. It didn't dig at anyone, didn't hide another edge. It was full, kind. No cruelty passed across this table, no mocking glances, no cold silences, only gratitude. The doorbell rang just as Grace finished her second glass. Eleanor rose, unhurried, and opened the front door to find Alan Brooks standing there, overcoat folded across one arm, a modest bouquet of sunflowers in hand. "For the chef," he said. Eleanor smiled, the warmth reaching her eyes. "Come in. You're just in time for dessert." Alan stepped inside, nodding toward Grace. "You look taller than last time." Grace grinned. "Maybe I am." They moved to the living room, plates cleared and replaced with coffee and a warm apple tart Eleanor had baked earlier in the day. Alan sat in the armchair by the fireplace, leaning back the way only people who'd watched something through to the very end could. Rachel arrived not long after, shrugging off her blazer as she stepped inside. She carried a small bottle of champagne and 3 mismatched flutes from her office, a celebratory impulse she didn't explain. She raised her glass toward Eleanor. "To resilience, and to the quietest strategist I've ever had the pleasure to serve." Eleanor lifted hers, fingers steady, eyes calm. "I was never alone." Grace turned toward her, soft smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You were always in control." They sat like that for a long while. No one rushed. No one glanced at their phone. The fire crackled and time slowed into something tender. At one point, Alan opened his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet, gold-lettered, embossed, signed and sealed. "I thought you might want a copy of the final ledger," he said. Eleanor took it gently, eyes skimming the numbers without needing to double-check. She had always known. The confirmation was for others. "I kept the original in the vault," Alan added. "But this is for you." Eleanor folded it once, neatly, and tucked it into the side table drawer, beside a crossword book and an old bookmark. Rachel looked over. "That statement? It says everything that needed to be said." Eleanor met her eyes. "The statement said what I never had to." Later, as the guests trickled out and the dishes were rinsed, Eleanor stood again at the kitchen window, looking out over her quiet street. The trees no longer danced like they were bracing against anything. The wind had softened. Behind her, Grace dried the last plate and slipped it into the cabinet. Music played low from the speaker on the counter, a jazz station Eleanor liked but never named. And in that moment, there was no vengeance left to tend. No final card to play, only the balance restored. No courtrooms. No shouting. Just this. Order returned. Silence honored. Trust earned. And when the banker brought the statements, it didn't just reveal numbers, it revealed the truth. "Just some numbers," Eleanor replied, folding one of the account summaries precisely and slipping it back into the envelope. Grace hovered near the desk. "Grandma." She lowered her voice. This is a lot of money. Why haven't you told them? Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. Because silence is stronger than noise. Grace bit her lip. They think you have nothing. I know, Eleanor said simply, sealing the envelope shut again. They treat you like... They treat me exactly how they want to, Eleanor interrupted, tone calm. But their mistake isn't in how they treat me. It's in what they assume I'm worth. Grace sat slowly on the edge of the bed. She looked down at her hands. You're not going to change their minds, you know. I'm not trying to, Eleanor said, reaching for her day planner. She flipped to the current week and circled a date 2 days from now. But I am going to make an appointment. With who? Alan Brooks. He's the senior banker on my accounts. I want to go over a few protections. Update some things. Grace blinked. You're not afraid they'll find out? I'm counting on them not to ask the right questions, Eleanor said, standing slowly. She placed the envelope back into the box, locked it, and tucked it once again behind the quilting magazines. She looked at Grace. Would you like to come with me? Grace hesitated. You trust me with all this? I do, Eleanor said. You've always listened. Grace smiled, but it was a quiet one, not bright. Like she understood now that the weight of knowing things came with its own responsibility. Eleanor crossed to her closet and pulled out her wool coat. She paused at the mirror. Let them keep thinking I'm invisible. Grace stood and moved beside her. What are you going to do? Eleanor reached into the coat pocket, pulled out a folded business card, and ran her thumb over Alan Brooks's name. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it hit like a loaded chamber. Let them choke on assumptions first. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, and from the hallway, faint footsteps echoed. Someone coming up the stairs. The door swung open harder than necessary. Sophie's heels clicked across the foyer like a metronome set to confrontation. Eleanor was in the kitchen, quietly washing the same teacup twice. She didn't flinch at the sound, just reached for the towel and dried it, slowly. Can we talk? Sophie's voice was tight, controlled, like she'd practiced the opening line in the car. Eleanor turned, unbothered. Of course. Mark followed his wife in, face already red. What the hell is going on? Mom? Sophie stepped in front of him, taking the lead like always. We know, Eleanor. Grace left her laptop open last night. We saw the bank folder. A quiet pause stretched between them. Eleanor folded the towel, set it down. You went through her things. You've been hiding money, Mark snapped. We saw the balances. You're sitting on hundreds of thousands, and you've been letting us believe you're broke? Eleanor looked at him like he was speaking through a fog. Letting you believe? You've been lying, Sophie's voice spiked. You have all this money, real money, and you're just hoarding it? Eleanor's tone didn't rise. It's my money. I've simply kept it safe. Mark stepped closer. You don't need that kind of money, Mom. You're 73. You live in this dusty old house. What are you even saving it for? Eleanor's eyes held his for a long, unblinking second. Not you. Grace, halfway down the stairs, froze mid-step. Her phone was already recording in her sweater pocket. She'd heard enough when she walked out of the bathroom, but now she stood in the stairwell shadow, quiet, watching. Mark blinked. Excuse me? I said. Eleanor repeated gently. Not you. Mark clenched his jaw. You think this is about me? You're damn right it's about me. I've been bailing out this house for years. Sophie and I could have helped you invest, grown it. Put it somewhere smart. It is somewhere smart, Eleanor said. Sophie pointed toward the stairs. Don't play games. Hand over the account info. We'll talk to the bank ourselves. No. Eleanor's answer came like a flat stone dropped in still water. No emphasis, no anger, just final. You don't get to say no anymore, Mark growled. We're your family. From the stairwell, Grace's hands trembled. But she held her phone steady. Family doesn't storm in demanding access, Eleanor said. They ask. And they listen. You've done neither. Mark stepped forward, and for a split second, Grace moved, instinctively, ready to intercept. But Eleanor lifted a single hand, stopping both of them in their tracks. She turned, walked calmly to the hall closet, and returned with a small briefcase. This is going to Rachel Miles tomorrow. She's my attorney. Mark laughed bitterly. Now you have a lawyer? I've had one for years, Eleanor replied. She's helped protect what little I had, what I earned, from people who think blood entitles them to take. You're overreacting, Sophie hissed, suddenly unsure. We're just trying to help. Eleanor's smile was thin. You're trying to control. Grace finally stepped into view, her phone still recording. This isn't how you treat someone you care about. Sophie turned, startled. You were listening? I was witnessing, Grace said. Her voice didn't shake. And I have everything recorded, just in case you try something you'll regret. Mark's eyes narrowed, but something in Grace's expression made him hold his tongue. Eleanor moved toward the door, opened it wide. I think we're done here for today. For a moment, no one moved. Then Mark stormed out first, jaw clenched, followed by Sophie, who tossed a final glare over her shoulder. Once the door slammed shut behind them, Eleanor let out a slow breath, not shaky, but measured. Grace walked over and handed her the phone. Should I save it to the cloud? Eleanor smiled and nodded. Please. That evening, Eleanor sat across from Rachel Miles in a quiet corner office downtown. The lawyer wore simple pearl studs and an expression of practiced focus as she reviewed the documents. You did everything right, Rachel said. We'll move the originals to my office vault. Nothing they can touch. Eleanor sipped her tea and looked out the window at the Milwaukee skyline. They'll see what power really looks like, she said softly. The downtown branch of Monroe National Bank didn't shout luxury, but it whispered legacy. Dark wood paneling, brass fixtures, heavy glass doors, all echoes of a time when money moved slower and trust was handwritten. Eleanor stepped into the lobby with Grace by her side, both dressed in muted tones like they belonged here without needing to prove it. The receptionist glanced up from her monitor and offered a polite smile. Ms. Price, she said, standing. Mr. Brooks is ready for you. They followed her past the teller windows and through a set of frosted glass doors into a quiet hallway. At the end waited a thick oak door with a gold-plated nameplate, Alan R. Brooks, Senior Vice President, Private Clients. Inside, the office smelled faintly of leather and ink. A long window framed the city's skyline behind a deep mahogany desk, where Alan Brooks stood to greet them. He was in his late 50s, trim, graying at the temples, with a demeanor that balanced precision with empathy. Eleanor, he said warmly, shaking her hand with both of his. Always a pleasure. He turned to Grace. And you must be the granddaughter I've heard so much about. Grace offered a cautious smile, unsure if this man was just another polished mask. Alan gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. Let's get into it, shall we? He pulled a leather portfolio from a drawer and laid it out before Eleanor. Inside, the most recent documents were arranged in chronological order, just as she liked them. He slid her a summary sheet. Total assets in your name, he said, tapping the first column. Across savings, CDs, and your retirement portfolio, currently total $1.73 million, no joint holders. All accounts are protected behind dual authentication access with biometric verification at the branch level. Grace blinked. Wait, biometric? Alan nodded. Thumbprint or retinal scan. Not even a power of attorney can move funds without in-person confirmation and legal triggers. Eleanor leaned forward, eyes sharp behind her reading glasses. And if someone tries? Alan's expression cooled. We flag it. Freeze the activity. Call you immediately. You're fully covered under our Elder Financial Protections Program. I helped to design it. Grace stared at her grandmother. You set this all up years ago. Eleanor didn't look away. Your grandfather and I planned for more than retirement. We planned for character. Alan smiled faintly. You were always ahead of the curve. I want Rachel Miles listed as my legal contact on all accounts, Eleanor said. Effective today. Alan nodded and made the note. Already drafted the authorization forms. She'll be able to verify status but not move funds, unless there's a documented legal directive. Good. Eleanor exhaled slowly. And if they press again? Alan's voice didn't rise, but his conviction was steel. If they press, I'll present the truth myself. I won't let them intimidate you. Grace watched him carefully. Why do you care? Alan met her eyes without flinching. Because this bank doesn't just protect money, it protects the people who earned it. Quietly. Honestly. Like your grandmother. The office fell silent for a moment. Outside the window, Milwaukee's traffic murmured by, indifferent, oblivious. But inside the room, power shifted like a weight being passed from one hand to another. Eleanor signed the final form and slid it across the desk. I'd like those statements ready. Should they try anything again? Itemized, clear, with signatures. I'll have them compiled and sealed, Alan said. You'll have the full packet by Thursday. Eleanor stood, buttoning her coat. Grace followed, more aware than ever that this woman, her grandmother, was a fortress wearing soft sweaters and a gentle voice. As they reached the door, Eleanor paused, turned back, and looked Alan in the eye. Statements, silence mockery. He nodded once. And this time, they'll hear every number loud and clear. Thursday morning arrived with a crispness in the air that hinted winter wasn't far behind. Eleanor sat in her sunroom with her knitting untouched beside her, a steaming cup of Earl Grey in hand, the silence occasionally broken by the ticking of the old mantel clock. She had just finished reviewing the final trust paperwork Rachel had couriered the night before when her landline rang, a sound that had become rare and, lately, significant. She answered on the third ring. Eleanor Price. Alan Brooks's voice came through, steady but urgent. Eleanor, good morning. I wanted to reach you directly before anyone else did. She didn't flinch. Go ahead. There was an attempt this morning, 8:17 a.m., at our Brookfield branch. A man identifying himself as your son, Mark Price, tried to withdraw funds from one of your legacy accounts. Which one? The savings account ending in 3641. He had an outdated statement, no valid ID, and, most concerning, a forged notarization document naming himself as financial proxy. We've frozen the account and flagged it internally. Nothing was withdrawn. Eleanor didn't react immediately. She set her tea down with care. Was he alone? Yes. He grew agitated when the teller told him the account was locked. Security was called, but he left before the branch manager arrived. I see, Eleanor said, calm as ever. We've initiated a fraud protocol, Alan continued, but I thought it was time to escalate. This is officially financial exploitation under state law. You have the option to file. Eleanor's fingers gently traced the edge of her teacup. Thank you, Alan. Please send the branch footage and incident report to Rachel Miles's office. Already in progress. She ended the call and sat quietly for a moment, letting the weight of the situation settle not on her, but around her. Like weather. It didn't change her, just moved past her. Rachel didn't hesitate. By 11 a.m., she had drafted and filed an initial complaint with the Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions and forwarded a duplicate to the Milwaukee County Elder Protection Unit. She met Eleanor at the law office, her tone brisk, face composed. This isn't just sloppy entitlement anymore. This was premeditated, forgery, attempted fraud. The documentation is airtight. Grace sat beside her grandmother in the small glass-walled conference room, absorbing it all with an expression that teetered between disbelief and fury. "Can he be arrested?" Grace asked. Rachel folded her hands. "It's on the table. But the first move is getting the investigation officially opened. The rest follows." Eleanor sipped the coffee someone had brought her. "Let the law do what it was made for." Grace shook her head. "He's panicking. That's what this is." Eleanor nodded faintly. "Desperation has a scent. And he's starting to wear it." Rachel slid over a copy of the report. "This document protects you and opens the door to further legal action if necessary. We're building a wall, Eleanor, and now it has teeth." Back at home that evening, Grace sat cross-legged on the floor of the living room while Eleanor finished a row of knitting. The news had settled over the house like a sudden drop in temperature. "He really thought he could just take it," Grace muttered, scrolling through her phone. "No shame, no strategy. Just walk in with a forged paper and hope no one notices." "They often assume quiet people are soft," Eleanor said without looking up. "But silence and softness are not the same." Grace glanced up. "You're not even rattled." Eleanor smiled, just barely. "Grace, they've spent years building their appetite. I've spent years building the locks on the pantry." She set her knitting aside and leaned back in the chair. "Their appetite is bigger than their plate. And now they're breaking the table." That night, Mark paced the hallway of his rental townhouse, phone clutched to his ear. "No, I don't care if they flagged it. She's lying, it's my mother's money. She's senile. Get the damn lawyer to threaten her, or I swear to God." Sophie stood in the doorway, arms crossed, pale. "You forged something, Mark. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a crime." "She pushed me there," he barked. "She left me no choice." "You left yourself no choice," she whispered. "And now we're both in it." Mark's phone buzzed again. A new number. Unknown. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A man's voice on the other end. Measured, official. "Mr. Price, this is Detective Aaron Blake, Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak, today." Detective Aaron Blake arrived at Eleanor's home promptly at 9 a.m., a black government sedan parked discreetly at the curb. He was younger than Eleanor expected, maybe early 40s, but he had the weary, observant eyes of someone who had learned to spot deceit in the silences between words. She greeted him at the door in a slate gray cardigan, her hair pinned neatly, her presence as calm as ever. Grace was already there, seated in the living room with her laptop open, expression unreadable. "Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Price," Blake said, extending his badge first, then his hand. "Please, come in," Eleanor replied. "We've been expecting you." He stepped inside, took a brief inventory of the space. Neat, warm, with decades of life lining the walls. Nothing about this place said chaos or confusion, only order, intention. They sat in the living room. Blake opened a small notebook and clicked a pen. "I'll be direct. We're opening an investigation into financial exploitation involving your son, Mark Price. I want to ask you a few questions and collect whatever documentation you're willing to provide." Eleanor nodded. "I have nothing to hide." Grace slid a flash drive across the coffee table. "This contains an audio recording from last week. My dad and Sophie confronted my grandmother after snooping through my laptop. You'll hear them demanding account access and threatening her when she refused." Blake raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. He simply placed the flash drive into his case. "Thank you. That'll be important." Eleanor rose and returned moments later with a slim folder. She handed it to him with steady hands. "Copies of all relevant account statements, notarized signatures, and my lawyer's contact info. Alan Brooks from Monroe Bank has already submitted a fraud incident report." Blake flipped through a few pages, nodding. "Very thorough. Most people aren't this prepared." "I've had practice," Eleanor said softly. He glanced up. Is there a reason you believe your son might escalate? There's a pattern, she said. He's always believed the rules don't apply to him, that what he wants should arrive, unquestioned. But want and deserve are not the same. Grace exhaled beside her, tension lining her shoulders. Later that afternoon, at Monroe National Bank, Alan Brooks handed over the ATM access logs, including the attempted withdrawal timestamp, the forged proxy document, and the video footage showing Mark arguing with the teller. I'm not looking to burn bridges, Alan told Blake as they sat across his desk, but I'm also not willing to let someone like Eleanor be bullied or stolen from. She's earned this protection. You're a rare breed in banking, Blake noted. Alan smiled slightly. In this building, her signature means more than his temper. Sophie arrived uninvited at Eleanor's doorstep that evening, her car barely parked straight on the curb. She didn't knock so much as bang. Eleanor opened the door without a word. Sophie's eyes were wild. You vindictive old woman. Do you have any idea what you've started? I didn't forge anything, Eleanor said. You could have warned us. You weren't owed a warning, Eleanor replied, voice steady. You were given years of decency and chose to spend them sneering. Sophie's mouth opened, but no words came out. Just breath. Just frustration and disbelief. Eleanor tilted her head. Go home, Sophie. Before you say something else you'll regret. The door closed gently. Click. That night, Rachel's voice came through the phone line calm and firm. I've drafted a new instrument, a protective estate trust. We'll isolate the major assets and lock the rest behind legal oversight. Mark will be excluded. Sophie, too. Grace will be the sole successor trustee, with conditional access upon your passing. Eleanor listened in silence for a moment, then said, Do it. I'll have it filed by Friday. Grace sat across the room, quietly scrolling through her phone. She looked up, eyes cautious. You okay? Eleanor gave her a faint smile. Every lie earns interest. They've spent years investing in fiction. It's time they see the bill. The first story dropped quietly, buried on page 3 of the Milwaukee Sentinel's Saturday edition. Financial exploitation alleged in prominent local family, elder protection laws invoked. There were no names at first, just initials and descriptions. But Milwaukee was a small enough city, and the Price name common enough in the right circles, that it didn't take long for speculation to fill in the blanks. By Monday morning, the online version included updates. Mark Price, 46, of Shorewood, under investigation for attempted financial exploitation of a family member. By Tuesday, his photo was embedded in the article, and by Wednesday, the whispering had turned into open murmurs. Eleanor stood in line at the Co-op bakery just after sunrise, the bell above the door chiming softly as she entered. The woman behind the counter smiled warmly, but with something else behind her eyes, a flicker of recognition. Morning, Miss Price, she said, punching in an order for scones. You want your usual? Eleanor nodded. Please. At the far end of the counter, 2 older women leaned in toward each other over steaming coffee mugs. Eleanor caught only a snippet of their hushed exchange. That's her, I think. The one from the article. Always seemed so nice, but I heard the son's a mess. You'd never guess. She always kept to herself. Eleanor took her scones without comment. As she turned to leave, one of the women looked up and offered a sheepish, apologetic smile. Eleanor returned a small nod, gracious, composed, unbothered. She stepped out into the morning chill. The headlines weren't the victory, but the silence that followed them, that was power. Across town, Mark slammed his phone onto the kitchen counter, sending it skittering into a half-empty bowl of instant ramen. They printed my face, he growled. They quoted the damn detective, said I refused to cooperate fully. They're painting me like some con man. Sophie stood at the sink, shoulders tight, dish soap clinging to her wrist. You forged a legal document, Mark? That's not spin. That's a fact. Oh, now you're turning on me too? I'm trying to keep my job, she snapped. You think this doesn't bleed into my life? It already had. That morning, her supervisor at the real estate firm had asked her to step into a private meeting. I'll be blunt, Sophie, her manager had said, sliding the Sentinel article across the desk. Clients are concerned. Your name is attached to this. And until it clears, we need to put you on leave. Without pay? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. We can't risk the firm's image. I'm sorry. Now, at home, she threw the sponge into the sink. We are radioactive. Do you get that? We're the people everyone crosses the street to avoid. Mark sank into a kitchen chair, his face pale, lips trembling with rage. She did this on purpose. She didn't forge anything, Sophie said, echoing Eleanor's words from days earlier. You did. He stared at the wall like it had betrayed him. She's 73, a retired math teacher. She was supposed to fold. But she hadn't. She'd doubled down. And now, everyone knew. Grace handed her phone to Eleanor as they sat on the back porch, the late autumn sun casting long shadows over the garden beds. Someone on the neighborhood app posted this, Grace said, scrolling to a screenshot of the article's comment section. You have no idea how many people are saying things like, good for her and protect your elders. Some even said they saw this coming, that you always carried yourself like someone who knew more than she let on. Eleanor took the phone, scrolled once, and handed it back. I've never needed them to say it. Grace smiled. Everyone knows now. Eleanor looked out at the barren trees along the fence line. Yes, they do. A breeze rattled the dry leaves still clinging to the branches. She took a slow breath, eyes narrowed slightly in the fading light. Shame, she murmured. Compounds faster than interest. Grace leaned back, the unspoken truth sitting between them like an old friend. The legal conference room was quiet, paneled in walnut and insulated from the noise of the city like a vault built for secrets. Eleanor sat at the polished table with a small fountain pen in hand, her posture as composed as a woman attending a recital, not rewriting the trajectory of her family legacy. Across from her, Rachel Miles clicked her Mont Blanc pen shut and slid the final document across the table. When you're ready, this transfers full control of the trust. Assets will move immediately upon processing. Alan Brooks stood beside Rachel, arms folded, calm but alert. All accounts will be retitled under the trust's name by end of business tomorrow. Any attempt to access them will require court intervention, and even then, it won't work. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She signed with the same care she taught her algebra students to use when solving for X, precise, deliberate, and irreversible. Grace sat beside her, shoulders tense, lips pressed into a tight line. She hadn't spoken since they arrived, only watched. First the documents, then her grandmother's face, then the quiet, professional nods exchanged between Rachel and Alan. It all felt like too much and not enough, all at once. Rachel added the final signature page to a leather-bound folder. Mark Price is now legally removed from any claim to your estate. Sophie Price as well. There are no contestation windows. You've made your wishes airtight. Alan added gently, they'll find nothing left to grab. Grace swallowed. But why me? Eleanor turned to her, eyes soft but unshakably clear. Because you listened. I didn't do anything, Grace said, voice cracking slightly. I just stayed. You didn't need to do more, Eleanor said. Everyone else shouted. You didn't. You heard me when I wasn't speaking. That's the difference. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was dense with truth. Rachel slid the documents into a slim briefcase and stood. I'll file these with the county clerk today. The trust becomes irrevocable at noon. Grace leaned back, hands trembling slightly in her lap. It's too much. It's exactly enough, Eleanor said. Silence deserves reward. Alan offered Eleanor a respectful nod. You've outplayed them with grace. Eleanor stood slowly, smoothed her coat, and gathered her gloves. Grace outplayed them with grace. I just set the table. They stepped out into the November wind together, the city just beginning to wake around them. Morning traffic hissed along the curbs, exhaust rising like fog. Grace walked a step behind her grandmother, still processing the weight of what had just passed through her hands, through ink, through law, through love that had no need to declare itself loudly. As they reached the parking lot, Grace asked softly, "What if they come after me next?" Eleanor looked over her shoulder with a faint smile. "Then they'll learn you've inherited more than a trust." Back in Shorewood, Mark sat on the couch with 3 unopened envelopes beside him, all legal-sized, all from institutions he no longer controlled. Sophie had stopped asking him what the next move was. She now spent most of her time in the guest room, door closed, laptop glowing late into the night. The TV was muted. He wasn't watching it anyway. His phone buzzed. A new email. Subject line, transfer confirmation, trust, 5129, Grace Price, successor. Mark stared at the screen, unmoving. Sophie emerged briefly, holding her car keys. She glanced at him, then the unopened envelopes. "You could have had everything, Mark," she said, voice low. "But you thought it would be handed to you." He didn't respond, just tapped the screen again, reading the name. Grace. That evening, Eleanor returned home and set the briefcase gently on the dining table. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She moved to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and turned the burner on. Grace stood in the doorway watching her. "Are you okay?" Eleanor turned to her with the smallest, most certain smile. "I've never been more okay." The kettle hadn't yet whistled, but she heard something else, louder, from outside. 3 knocks at the front door. Firm. Familiar. The front door creaked open. Cold wind blew in with it. Sophie Price stood on the stoop, cheeks flushed from the weather, or maybe rage, her trench coat unbuttoned, hair wind-tossed, eyes wild with something more primal than anger. Eleanor didn't blink. "You weren't invited." Sophie pushed past her without waiting. "I didn't come for tea." Grace appeared in the hallway within seconds. Her phone already in her hand, recording before a single word left Sophie's mouth. She didn't announce it. She didn't have to. Sophie whirled around. "You think this is finished?" she spat. "You think because you signed some documents, we're just going to disappear?" Eleanor closed the front door behind her with the soft click of practiced calm. "That would be wise." Sophie stepped closer, too close. "You stole our future, Eleanor. You were never promised it." Sophie's voice dropped low, venomous. "We'll take it anyway. The house. The accounts. Grace's little trust fund. Don't think for a second we don't know it's in her name." Grace's grip tightened around her phone. "That's a threat." "No," Sophie snapped. "That's a promise. You want to drag this into the courts? You want cameras? Discovery? We'll gut your reputation with accusations so dirty no bank or lawyer will touch you again." Eleanor didn't flinch. "I've been a widow longer than you've been a wife. I've survived worse storms than your tantrums." Sophie sneered. "You're just a tired old woman playing queen of an empire that's built on math and patience," Eleanor interrupted. "2 things you've never bothered to understand." Grace's phone stayed steady as Sophie paced, eyes darting like a cornered animal. "You don't think we have connections?" Sophie hissed. "We'll find a judge, a backdoor, something. No trust is bulletproof." "No," Eleanor said quietly, "but I am." The silence that followed was immediate and ice-thick. Grace, calm now, turned off the recording and slipped her phone into her back pocket. "This is going to Alan, and Rachel, and Detective Blake." Sophie's face paled. "You wouldn't." "I would," Grace said. "And I just did." Alan Brooks didn't need convincing. He filed the video clip under Client Threat Internal Escalation and forwarded it to the bank's legal compliance team. Within hours, he called Eleanor directly. "This incident is on record," he told her. "She can't step foot in a branch, can't speak to a teller, and cannot access any account or file bearing your name or Grace's. She's been flagged institutionally across all partner banks." Eleanor listened, stirring a cup of tea slowly. "Good. I'll also have your statements moved into deep vault access. No digital trace, no employee access without layered authorization." Eleanor nodded to herself. "Let them scream into locked doors." Rachel took it further. By noon, she had submitted a petition for a protective restraining order. It wasn't just about finances anymore. It was about safety. "She's escalating," Rachel said bluntly during a call with Detective Blake. "This is the second time she's shown up uninvited and made threats. We're not waiting for a third." Blake didn't argue. "We'll attach the statement to the existing exploitation case. The DA's office is already watching. This only makes the outcome stronger." That night, Eleanor sat by the fireplace, the soft crackle of the logs filling the room. Grace was curled up in the armchair across from her, laptop open, but her eyes were focused on Eleanor. "She's unraveling," Grace said. "They both are," Eleanor replied, "because the illusion broke. They thought I was weak because I was quiet." Grace nodded slowly. "You really aren't afraid of them." Eleanor looked at the flames. "They're proving me right. Every day. Every threat. They dig their own grave. I just hold the light." The clock chimed once. "Fear," Eleanor said softly, "is louder than confidence now." The Monroe National Bank conference room was designed to impress. Walnut walls, frosted glass panels, a long table that could seat 20. Eleanor had sat at it once before, when she and Alan restructured the trust. But this time, the chairs would be full, and the storm would be hers to weather quietly. Alan Brooks stood at the head of the table, gray suit pressed, folder in hand. Not a banker today. Not just. Today, he was a gatekeeper. The conference room door opened promptly at 10 a.m. Mark and Sophie entered side by side. Sophie's lipstick was bold, her jaw tense. Mark's eyes swept the room as if he expected cameras or applause. When he saw Eleanor already seated at the end of the table, his lips curled upward. But it wasn't a smile. It was the look of a man who believed he was about to win. Rachel Miles sat next to Eleanor, calm, pen in hand, reading glasses perched on her nose. Her expression never moved. Grace stood along the far wall, arms crossed, silent and observing. Neither participant nor passive. A witness. Alan nodded to the group and gestured toward the seats. "Thank you all for coming." Mark pulled out a chair across from Eleanor and dropped into it. "So," he said, "we doing this the easy way or the expensive way?" Sophie leaned in. "We're here to resolve access issues. We're not here to be lectured." Alan didn't sit. Instead, he opened the folder and began distributing packets down the table. "These are full printouts of every attempted interaction with Eleanor Price's accounts from the past 60 days, he said. "Each page includes timestamps, device data, IP traces, and security cam stills where applicable." Mark flipped through the first pages and paled. "You kept logs?" "We log everything," Alan said, "especially when behavior crosses into fraud." Sophie glanced at the documents. Her name, Sophie Price, was printed on a page labeled Flagged Activity, Proxy Access Attempt, Unauthorized. "You have no right to surveil us," she snapped. "We have every right to protect our clients," Alan said smoothly. "Especially when they're elderly and at risk." which, under Wisconsin statute, you've helped us prove. Mark slammed the packet shut. This is a performance. You're trying to scare us. I'm showing you paper, Alan replied, unbothered. Paper doesn't tremble. People do. Eleanor said nothing. Her hands rested folded in her lap. Her expression was unreadable. Rachel leaned forward, her voice crisp. I should remind you both that this is a voluntary meeting. No accusations are being made today. Only facts are being presented. If either of you wishes to dispute the documents, I suggest you retain counsel before responding. Sophie laughed, but it sounded brittle. This is about the trust, isn't it? You think cutting us out will make us disappear? This all goes public. We'll drag Grace through the mud with us. Grace straightened from the wall, her voice calm but steel-lined. Try it. Mark's face twisted. You've brainwashed her. No, Eleanor said softly, speaking for the first time. I didn't have to. She simply watched who you were long enough. Alan closed the folder. As of today, all access attempts have been documented and sealed. Any further effort, digital or physical, to access Eleanor or Grace's holdings will be forwarded directly to the Financial Crimes Unit. Mark's fists clenched. You think money makes you untouchable? No, Eleanor replied. I think ethics do. You should try them. Sophie stood abruptly, chair scraping against the hardwood. This isn't over. Rachel slid her glasses off. Actually, it is. Unless you'd prefer it to continue in a courtroom. A long, charged silence followed. Finally, Mark rose. He didn't speak. He didn't look at Eleanor. He just turned and walked out of the room, fists clenched tight at his sides. Sophie followed, heels clicking like gunshots on the polished floor. The room emptied slowly. Rachel gathered her notes. Alan offered Eleanor a quiet nod before stepping out. Grace lingered behind. She moved beside her grandmother, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. Eleanor looked up, smiled faintly. I told you. They never see the paper coming. The silence after the confrontation at the bank wasn't relief. It was restraint. Like a coiled spring, waiting for one more hand to reach too far. Eleanor didn't flinch in its presence. She knew how to live inside waiting. She had done it before. During cancer scares, late bills in the early years of marriage, snowstorms that buried them in for days. This kind of waiting, the legal kind, the strategic kind, was measured in paperwork, not panic. She spent her mornings watering the violets in the sunroom, misting the leaves with careful precision. Outside, wind rattled the windows, but inside, her hands were steady. She trimmed a browning stem, clipped a single dead leaf, not rushed, not idle, because patience, Eleanor knew, was its own currency. Across town, in the crumbling stillness of their townhouse, Mark and Sophie were unraveling. The credit card companies had started calling again. Sophie had stopped answering by the third voicemail. The lawyer Mark contacted had sent back a single-sentence reply: conflict of interest, decline representation. The water heater broke Monday morning. The home warranty had lapsed last year, quietly canceled when Mark had moved the payment to a card that maxed out. He tried to call another bank on Tuesday, hoping to open a new line of credit. The application was flagged in under 6 minutes. A red internal hold notice flashed in the clerk's system, followed by a quiet, awkward apology. Unfortunately, sir, it seems your name's been restricted by a compliance review. Sophie stood in the kitchen later that day, staring at the bank's rejection email on her phone. We're poison, she whispered. We can't even get a loan for a used car now. Mark didn't respond. He sat on the couch, face slack, TV flickering with static images he wasn't watching. They really did it, Sophie said, her voice cracking. They closed the door. You thought she wouldn't, but she did. I still have time, Mark muttered, eyes fixed on nothing. There's always another door. always. But he didn't sound like he believed it anymore. Grace watched the collapse unfold through secondhand glimpses, email threads, forwarded legal updates, community whispers. She received a DM from one of Sophie's former colleagues. "Is it true your grandma locked them out of everything? Total legend." Grace didn't reply, but she read it twice. At night, she sat with Eleanor by the fireplace, their silence companionable. Eleanor read gardening catalogs and made notes in the margins, circling new bulb varieties for spring. Grace scrolled through headlines about financial crimes and smiled to herself. "They haven't filed anything new," she said one evening. "No contestations, no counter-filings, not even a letter from a lawyer." Eleanor looked over the rim of her glasses. "Of course not." "You're not even a little surprised?" "No," Eleanor replied, turning the page. "They're not planners, they're reactors. And right now, they're out of reactions." At the bank, Alan Brooks compiled the final packet. It was a master file. Trust documents, access logs, protective orders, Rachel's legal correspondence, and a full index of all flagged transactions. He had it bound in leather, the cover embossed with gold foil. Estate portfolio, Eleanor Price. He locked it in the branch vault himself. If anything happened from here, they'd be ready. Rachel emailed Eleanor that same afternoon. Subject: Final trust protections. Message: confirming completion of all structural updates. Transfer to irrevocable status is on record. Grace is secure. You are protected. Let me know if they blink again. Eleanor replied with a single word. Understood. The wind picked up that night. Trees thrashed against the dark. But in Eleanor's home, the light remained warm. Constant. Grace brewed chamomile. Eleanor folded a quilt. Somewhere in Shorewood, a mailbox filled with overdue bills. A faucet leaked in the dark. A car engine refused to turn over. The Monroe National Bank conference room was colder than usual. Not from the thermostat, but from something heavier, unspoken and sealed behind every polished surface. Outside, the city pulsed with late afternoon noise, traffic lights clicking, crosswalks chiming, a steady hum of life moving forward. But inside the glass-paneled meeting room on the 12th floor, time felt frozen, like the start of a verdict. Alan Brooks stood at the head of the long table, leather folder tucked under one arm. His expression was unreadable, not stern, not soft, just prepared. The others were already seated. Eleanor Price sat at the far end of the table, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. No notepad, no pen, just presence, her spine straight, her breath steady. To her right, Grace sat in quiet solidarity, dressed simply but with the kind of posture that said she belonged there, and knew it. Her phone sat screen down on the table, recording audio just in case. Rachel Miles, flanked beside her, nodded once as Alan entered. Her briefcase remained unopened. She'd brought it because protocol required it, not because she expected to need it. Across the table, Mark leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking like a man waiting for a punchline. Sophie, seated next to him, had taken a different tactic, quiet, composed, chin raised, but her eyes flicked too often to the door, to the clock, to the folder Alan held. Nerves under nail polish. Alan placed the folder gently on the table. Didn't open it yet. Just let the weight of it speak for itself. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice neutral but carrying. "This is a formal review of asset transitions, legal filings, and account protections related to Eleanor Price and the Price Family Trust." Mark gave a short laugh, more exhale than sound. "Did we really need all this just to read paperwork?" Alan didn't even glance at him. He looked to Rachel. She nodded. A subtle green light. He opened the folder. Over the last 90 days, our institution has logged multiple access attempts into the financial ecosystem of Eleanor Price. As documented previously, these attempts included forged proxies, unauthorized logins, and physical confrontations. He flipped the first page. This meeting is to finalize the wall that's already been built, and to confirm, in this room, that there's no path forward for further interference. Mark leaned forward, voice sharp. So you're just locking us out? For good? Over nothing but speculation and assumptions? Alan turned the page without looking up. The speculation is sealed, time-stamped, and notarized, including your own signature twice on documents that no longer match bank authorization records. Sophie's lips parted slightly. Her hand twitched toward Mark's, but stopped short. Eleanor hadn't spoken. Not once. Grace finally turned her gaze on Mark. You know what you did. Pretending otherwise doesn't make you clever. It just makes you loud. Rachel remained still, watching, measuring. Alan continued, voice never rising. All remaining assets under the Price Family Trust are now irrevocably assigned to Grace Price. The structure has been validated by both internal legal and external estate counsel. The trust cannot be undone, reversed, or disputed in court without hard evidence of malfeasance, which, to date, has not occurred. And won't. Mark's face reddened. She doesn't deserve... She listened, Eleanor said. At last. Her voice was soft, and that made it cut harder. That's all she ever did. That's more than either of you managed in a decade. The room went still. Even Alan paused before sliding the final page across the table. This is the last summary. It includes the updated beneficiary confirmation, final bank endorsements, and statement totals. Grace didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. Mark's fingers twitched, but he didn't move. Couldn't. Sophie's shoulders slumped, barely perceptible. Rachel leaned back slightly, folding her hands. We're done here. Eleanor stood. Slowly. Grace stood with her. She didn't touch the folder. She didn't offer any final speech, but she turned to Alan with the faintest smile. This, she said, is the meal I waited for. The air inside the conference room was still. No one moved. No one breathed deeply. The scent of wood polish and stale coffee hung just beneath the surface of something heavier. Finality. Alan Brooks remained standing. He hadn't closed the folder. Not yet. He ran one finger slowly down the column of numbers, as though double-checking a silent truth the rest of the room wasn't yet ready to hear. Across from him, Eleanor waited. Not stiff, not smug, just certain. Rachel leaned back in her chair with her arms folded, quiet approval written across every inch of her. Grace sat poised, her posture strong, but her hand discreetly resting against Eleanor's knee beneath the table. A silent show of support, one the room did not deserve to witness. Mark and Sophie were still seated on the far side of the table. The only sound between them was the occasional tap of Mark's shoe against the polished floor, a rhythm he couldn't seem to stop. Alan finally looked up. What I'm about to read into record, he began, is not just a statement of assets. It is, by legal definition, a confirmation of status, of sovereignty, and of separation. He turned the page. As of this morning, the Eleanor M. Price Revocable Trust, now irrevocable, is valued at $3.26 million in diversified holdings. Mark flinched like he'd been struck. Sophie visibly stiffened. Alan continued, voice calm, deliberate. This includes 2 high-yield CDs, long-standing savings accounts, a conservatively managed mutual fund portfolio, and multiple deeded assets, including this very property. He paused to let it land. None of which, he added, are accessible, nor ever were, to Mark Price or Sophie Price. There are no shared accounts, no joint beneficiaries, no power of attorney, no legal route to claim or control any of these assets. Sophie opened her mouth but said nothing. Mark's voice came out hoarse. "You're lying." Rachel didn't flinch. "He isn't." Alan turned the page again. "Grace Price," he said, "is the sole named beneficiary and successor trustee. Per legal filings processed and sealed over 4 weeks ago, the assets are bound, the structure has survived every challenge, and the protection is permanent." Mark blinked. He looked over at Eleanor like he didn't recognize her. "You were poor. You said you didn't have anything." "I never said that," Eleanor replied, coolly. "You assumed it." Alan placed a single slip of paper at the center of the table. Not a statement, just a document summary. At the top, one word, finalized. "I also have, at this time, supporting documentation of multiple exploitation attempts, dates, timestamps, forgeries, audio recordings, IP logs, witness statements. These have been shared with the Department of Justice's Elder Fraud Division." Sophie stood abruptly. "This is a setup. She's manipulating you. She's done nothing," Alan cut in, voice sharp for the first time all day. "You did this to yourselves." Mark slumped back in his chair. The red had drained from his face. His fingers, twitching seconds ago, now lay still. For a long moment, it looked like he might speak. But instead, he sank further, covering his face with both hands. A silent collapse. Sophie stood frozen beside him, hand on the back of her chair as if to keep herself upright. Eleanor finally exhaled. Just once, deep and unhurried. It wasn't just relief. It was reclamation. She turned her head toward Grace. "It's done," she said simply. Grace nodded. "Finally." Alan slid the folder closed with a soft snap. "I trust there are no further questions." No one responded. Rachel rose first. Grace followed. Then Eleanor stood, slow, steady, and taller than she'd seemed an hour ago. They moved as a unit toward the door. At the threshold, Eleanor paused. She turned halfway, looking not at the people she left behind, but at the empty chair she'd once believed would always belong to family. Then she spoke. Not to them, not even to the room. Just into the space where memory had once lived. "Penniless?" she whispered. "No." She stepped forward, powerful. The elevator doors hissed open, but Mark didn't wait. He shoved past the bank's receptionist, down the hallway, into the sunlight like a man fleeing a crime scene. Sophie followed 3 steps behind, her heels striking the marble floor in sharp, frantic beats. Neither looked back. Outside, the city didn't slow for their exit. Cars passed, pedestrians walked, a bus hissed to a stop. No one cared that they'd just lost everything. But they felt it. In their skin. In the way heads turned. In the brief glances cast their way by strangers who knew enough to connect names with scandal. Humiliation didn't need to be shouted. Sometimes, it just needed an audience. Inside the bank, the doors to the 12th floor conference room clicked shut behind Eleanor. Grace looped her arm gently through her grandmother's, grounding them both as they moved toward the elevator. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was the punctuation on a sentence Eleanor had written years ago, quietly, carefully, with long division and compound interest. Rachel walked beside them, her leather briefcase finally open now, filled with documents no one would need to argue anymore. As they waited for the elevator to arrive, Rachel exhaled, slow and pleased. "It's done." Eleanor gave the smallest nod. So is the noise. Later that day, back at the precinct, Detective Aaron Blake finished typing the last entry into his report. "Case closed. Financial exploitation. Price family. Final disposition. Protective measures successful. No further action required." He didn't smile, but his eyes lingered on the line for a second longer than usual. Justice didn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it just looked like an old woman walking out of a bank with her head high. He closed the file and moved on to the next name in the queue. 2 days later, Eleanor stood at her kitchen sink rinsing blueberries, the morning sun warming the counter tiles. Outside the window, the birch trees swayed in the breeze like dancers warming up for autumn. Grace sat at the table, laptop open, typing softly. She hadn't moved in hours. Eleanor hummed to herself, a song too old to have a name. On the windowsill, the violets bloomed again, fuller now, richer. As though they, too, had been waiting.